set?
Ready to go?
Good to go.
Okay. Welcome. I'd like to call the meeting to order. It is 9:01 a.m. Stephanie, would you please take attendance?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Ava Bermuda Zimmerman has not joined us yet. Ellen McKitterick has not joined us yet. David Salazar Austin.
Here.
Thank you. Mike Soltis
Here.
and Holly Williams.
Here.
Thank you. Good morning. All right, we have a quorum.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. I would like to welcome and thank the members of the public for joining us today. First item on the agenda is a review and approval of the May 6, 2025 meeting minutes. I'd like to ask the committee for a review of those minutes and a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Second? It was David?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the update on the revisions to the consolidated policies. Michael, would you please provide us the update on those revisions?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike, and good morning, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. And I apologize for the sort of haphazard nature of this. This was not the ideal way we wanted to do it. We'll get into a little more detail about why it's working this way. We're going to have two revisions to the consolidated policies, one that's sort of in progress, one that's just getting started. Not the way we want it, the ideal way to do it, but it's sort of the nature of the timing of the new law. So first, before we talk about the new law, I want to talk about the revisions that the board voted to post for public comment back in May. So we've completed that public comment period. This is the sort of overview of what those items were, the revisions were about, sort of a little bit of a hodgepodge of items. The biggest, as far as like a word count perspective, is probably that top one where we merged the old glossary, the definitions that were in there, into consolidated policies so that the public could just refer to one section rather than having to bounce back and forth between the two documents. So as I said, public notice and comment period has concluded. We did receive one public comment regarding those changes. It was about the definition of bonding leave. The comment asked that we confirm that the definition of bonding leave was consistent with Connecticut FMLA statutes. So we did review that. At the end of the day, there were no changes made to the policy as a result of that comment, because we did feel like the definition of bonding leave captured the sort of two elements of the law related to bonding leave. The first is from the statute itself, where it talks about leave being available upon birth of a son or daughter, as well as upon placement of a son or daughter for adoption or foster care. That's one element, but also it incorporated the Connecticut FMLA regulation that spoke to sort of the additional reasons for leave, or different additional clarification about the reason for leave, that it can also be before the actual placement of or adoption, if there's a process that the employee has to go through in order to make the adoption or foster care proceed. So the examples given in the regulation were counseling sessions, appearing in court, etc., things like that. So we did feel like the definition captured both of those, and so therefore didn't need to be changed. In addition, really the purpose of that definition more than anything else is just to make it clear when we say bonding leave, what that means, because officially in our statute, it doesn't talk about bonding leave. Bonding leave is just sort of the colloquial term that everyone in the industry refers to these types of leaves to sort of distinguish it from caregiver or maybe the employee's own pregnancy. So it's common knowledge among folks who work in this industry, but maybe not for the entire public. So the definition is just there to say, when we say bonding leave, what do we mean? So we do feel like the definition as written is sufficient. That said, we did make changes, but those changes were based on the conversation we had in May among the committee, where we talked about whether it's necessary to add definitions that are found in the statute, whether those should also be found in the consolidated policies, and the ultimate decision by the committee was, yes, it would be helpful for the public. So I did add various definitions, mostly around various family members, basically copying over the definition from the statute, primarily the FMLA statute, and citing to that as well as repeating the definition so that once again, sort of for the convenience of the public, they can just refer to that one section rather than having to bounce back and forth between the statute and the consolidated policies. So those are the only changes that were made after the committee last saw it in May. The goal would be to have the board officially adopt it next week in the board meeting. But before that happens, happy to take any questions that the committee may have.
Any questions or comments for Michael? I think what you've described is consistent with what we've discussed in prior meetings, so it seems like we just move to the board and proceed from there.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. Let's move on to the next item, and we'll be back to you in a little bit, Michael, which is a discussion of board officers. And Aaron, will you please lead that discussion?
Thank you so much, Mike. So per our bylaws, well, per the statute, we have a chairperson and a vice chairperson. And the statute allows us to establish any other officers that the board thinks should be necessary. So in our bylaws, we have a chairperson, a vice chairperson, and a secretary. The vice chairperson is authorized to perform all of the duties and responsibilities of the chairperson in the absence or incapacity of the chairperson. In practice, when the chair has been absent, the vice chair has stepped in to hold the meetings. We also created a secretary. The bylaws say that the secretary shall perform whatever duties the board assigns to it. In practice, we do have resolutions that relate to signatory authority, and those resolutions say that the chairperson and the CEO have the authority to enter into contracts and MOUs, etc. And they say that the secretary and other officers of the board are authorized to certify to third parties as to the authority of the chairperson and the CEO and anyone else to sign contracts. No one's ever asked for that, but theoretically someone could want that validation. So in all of our years, really what the secretary has been second in line. Good morning, Ellen. Second in line, if the chair has been unavailable and the vice chair is unavailable, we've gone to the secretary to say, hey, could you lead this meeting? We are also supposed to have elections for the vice chair and secretary, which is what's prompting this discussion, because before we say, hey, we really are supposed to be doing elections for these positions, a reasonable question is, what are they supposed to do? And candidly, the secretary doesn't have a whole lot to do. So we really wanted to bring it, good morning, Eva, we wanted to bring it to you as the Policy and Personnel Committee to kind of have a preliminary discussion about, do we feel that it is still valuable to have a secretary position when sort of their role has been to, again, if necessary, certify as to the signatory authority, which the vice chair can also do, and to sort of back up the vice chair when the vice chair is backing up the chairperson. Other boards may have their secretaries, set the agendas and do the minutes, but our staff does that. So that's never been a responsibility of the secretary of this particular board. So that's the question presented. What do you all think?
Who is our secretary now?
It was John. So John, and in the very beginning, I don't even remember if it was the first board meeting or the second board meeting, but it was in public. So it was fall of 2019. Josh Jabal was our chairperson, and he said, if anyone would like to be an officer, let me know. And if we had more than one person sort of sign up for any space, we would do an election. Otherwise, we'll just sort of vote to ratify that these people have volunteered to be the officers. And so that's what happened. Fran had volunteered to be the vice chair, John had volunteered to be the secretary, and the board voted to ratify that.
Mm-hmm.
When Josh left and Fran became the chair, sort of voted to say, at the time, the DIS commissioner or her designee should be the vice chair, and John would continue to be secretary. We haven't done any elections since, which is our fault. We should be doing them more frequently. So currently our secretary position is vacant.
Okay, any thoughts or questions on the issue of the secretary? I suspect everybody agrees we should be having elections consistent with the statute.
Yes, I very much agree with
so
that.
and what is that? How often should we? Or
We're
how
supposed to
often
do it
must
annually.
we have elections?
So we are supposed to do it annually, so we have missed that for the last couple of years.
Okay, so we need a schedule. I mean,
Yes.
when should we do that annually? But put that aside for the moment.
Yeah, we will get ourselves cleaned up on this. But again, we realized before we can say, hey, would anyone like to be
Yeah.
secretary? We realized it probably made sense to know what the secretary does.
Okay. Any
Well,
thoughts?
Well, I have a question. So if it's in accordance with the statute and then in the bylaws, so we're not so are you asking us to weigh in as to whether or not we should have the position at all, and then we would vote to have it in the interim and then seek a statutory change?
So the secretary is just in the bylaws.
Okay,
So
just in the bylaws, just in the bylaws. Okay.
If this committee said, you know what, we really don't need a secretary, we could bring that to the board and say, we want to vote on a vice chair, which is statutory, and we would then look to amend the bylaws to eliminate the secretary. Or we can say, yeah, we think having a secretary is useful, and we're fine with the two things that the secretary does right now. You know, be a certifier and be a backup. Or we say, we think it's good to have a secretary and we think we should give them more work to do.
And just to reiterate, this is just for this committee or for the board?
For the
at large?
board. I'm asking this committee because it feels like a policy and personnel related topic. So what you recommend is what we will bring to the board, because the board would have to take ultimate action on a bylaws change, and obviously the elections would be of the full board.
So my thinking is not to have positions that, you know, are superfluous, but I think considering this is only 3 deep, then in the event that the chair is out for whatever reason and the vice chair steps in, then you kind of keep that 1-2 spot continuity.
Mhm.
It's probably unlikely that you'd have, you know, all 3 of your officers, you know, unavailable at any given time. But I mean, I don't think there's any harm in keeping it 3 deep. But I don't know that I would expand the duties. I think the duties are fine as is. That's just my opinion. I don't think that there's a need to go further than we go now, but I don't see any harm in kind of keeping the structure as is.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else?
I agree with Holly. I'm generally not a fan of having a job that doesn't have much to do. But I think having 3 deep is not a lot. But if we don't have work for them to do, I don't see the sense in expanding responsibilities.
Give them additional work that we don't need done. Huh?
Right.
I'd personally like to see what platform the secretary candidates run on. You know, I will do absolutely nothing. I was kind of leaning the other direction, but I don't feel strongly about it. I agree there's no harm in having it, and I guess it's a good redundancy to have, you know, that 3rd level. So I'm fine with that too.
And I recall a couple of times John Scott did fill in to chair a meeting,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So that occasion did arise when the chair and vice chair were not available. All right, Eva, I think that's the only one we haven't heard from. if she's with us.
I saw her come in.
Okay, well, not hearing from her, I think you got a sense of certainly the consensus of the group is to continue with the position with those two roles, the certifier and the backup to the backup, and not to go look for additional responsibilities to add to the secretary's role.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate the
All
feedback.
right, thank you, and we'll look forward to getting into compliance.
Me too. Indeed, and Michael really, really does.
Okay, let's move to the next item. Michael, again, new revisions to the consolidated policies based on Public Act 25-174.
Thank you, Mike, and hello again, everybody. I'll share my screen again. So once again, apologies for the sort of dual nature of this. The legislature passed Public Act 25-174. I believe it was the last day of session, so the timing sort of worked out. If we want to get this all said and done by October 1st, we kind of have to move a little bit faster than we normally would. So that's sort of why we haven't yet finished revisions of the existing changes, and we're adding new ones to it. So this is the second half of that. This is the other document that I had sent over this weekend to folks. The legislation, I believe Maddie and Aaron have probably explained it in more detail, but just to really quickly go through this again. The new legislation makes it mandatory that employees of public school operators and non-public elementary and secondary schools that are in positions that do not require certification, they will start to participate in the program as of October 1st. Employees at those employers who are in positions that require certification remain exempt, although for public school operators, they can negotiate via collective bargaining agreement, which has always been the rule. It sort of introduced this concept of public school operators and defined it. It's essentially replacing the old definition of local and regional boards of education, although it makes it clear what that means by expanding it to cover charter schools, magnet schools, things of that nature. So that's all the first half of that change. The second half of the law allows the authority to calculate an alternate base period and base weekly earnings for these employees. The intent of that change and that authority is meant to avoid variation in the paid leave outcomes, because we know sometimes these employees get paid at different intervals or frequencies. Before I get into the actual changes that I've made to I'm recommending to the consolidated policies, I did want to talk about that last item a little bit and sort of why it might be necessary to have an alternate calculation. So our understanding is that school employees, particularly those who work only during the school year and don't work during the summer, may be given options for how they're paid and how they receive a paycheck. And what we wanted to avoid have happen, if at all possible, is multiple employees who work the exact same job for the exact same employer and have the exact same annual pay don't end up with totally different paid leave calculations at the end of the day. So on the screen is a couple examples. These are 3 employees, all who earn $30,000 in a year, who have chosen different ways to get paid that $30,000. Just sort of display how this could, if we keep the existing formula, how it could end up with different outcomes. So employee number 1, they're only working 10 months, but they're paid over 12 months. They keep getting the exact same paycheck during the summer that they got during the school year. For the sake of the math, 30,000 breaks down pretty easily into 2,500 every month. Employee number 2 works only the 10 months of the school year and is only paid for the 10 months of the school year. And that breaks down to basically $3,000 a month. It's not always going to always equal this. Sometimes you might get a paycheck in August. Sometimes you might get one less paycheck in June. But just for the ease of math, these are the examples we're giving. Employee number 3 is sort of a little bit of both. They get paid over 10 months, but then they get a sort of larger balloon payment at the start of the summer that's meant to cover them for the July and August payments. So as you can see, all 3 employees get the same total amount at the end of the year. Moving to the table in the top right, this is how it breaks down by quarter for each one of those scenarios. So employee number 1, $7,500 every quarter, no difference between the quarters. Employee number 2, 3 quarters of $9,000, 1 quarter of $3,000. And employee number 3 has a quarter of $2,500, 2 quarters of $7,500, and then 1 quarter of $12,500. I made bold the 2 highest quarters because that's what we use for calculating the formula under the existing calculation. So as you can see in the bottom right, very different outcomes for what the paid leave benefit would be for those 3 employees who otherwise are earning the exact same amount. Employee number 1 gets a little bit under $550 a month, or $550 a week. Employee number 3 gets almost $700 a week. So almost $150 difference between those 2 employees. And chances are when they chose that different pay frequency, it wasn't in order to get a better paid leave benefit. It was for other reasons, for budgetary reasons, and better pay their bills during the summer. If we keep this calculation and keep the standard calculation, I imagine most employees will decide that third option is the best way to go because it ends up with the higher paid leave benefit. And we don't want to be the reason why someone changes how they're paid. So that's sort of the reasoning behind why we thought it was helpful to have a different calculation, or at least the ability to have a different calculation for these folks. So what were the proposed revisions based on this law in general? Because there's those existing drafted revisions that we're hoping the board officially adopts next week, when I sent the document over, I assumed that all of those revisions were approved just to make it clear sort of what the new revisions are in the red lines. One series of changes was just about the definition of public school operators. So basically, as I said, it sort of replaces the old category of local or regional boards of education. So made sure that everywhere the consolidated policies referred to that. It also made it changed it to public school operators. We also made it clear that regional education service centers, RESCs, are included in that definition. They're not specifically called out in the statute, but from everything we've read in the case law, they are essentially the same as local or regional boards of education, which is in the statute. So we're making it clear in the policy that they are also covered in the same category. Also, because the law added a new definition of public school operators, all the citations after that definition got bumped up a number. So we just made sure that all the citations in the policy reflect those new statutory citations. As I spoke about the potential for different calculations of the paid leave benefit based on pay frequency, we did add a provision related to that calculation. So the idea would be take their annual earnings across the 4 quarters and evenly divide them across the 4 quarters. So that essentially if you're getting the $30,000 every year, divide it by 4, and each one of those, that's the quarterly amount that we'll allocate to you, regardless of when they're actually received. If an employee is a newer hire, such as they didn't work all 4 quarters of that year, we'd only average the quarters they actually were employed and receiving a paycheck. It doesn't apply to the certified employees who maybe participate, through a collective bargaining agreement. I'd love to be able to do that, but the statute doesn't give us the authority to do that at this time. So we could end up having maybe teachers who collectively bargain, who get the standard formula, and then these folks who are the non-certified folks who have this sort of smoothed out calculation. In the policy, it allows private plans to use a similar calculation, but they could use a standard calculation if they want. It's sort of up to the employer. And it makes it clear that it only applies to employees who just work during the school year, who don't work during the summer, and only those who are given the choice of payment options. So if you're not given the choice or you work the full school year, that calculation would not apply to you and you just use a standard calculation. The last change to the policies is making it clear that we are going to have a different employment verification form for these employers. It's necessary both for this calculation, but also because this population of employers are going to have half of their population covered, half their population not covered because of that certification requirement. And we need them to confirm whether an employee is certified or in a position that requires certification or not before we can approve or deny the claim. So the goal is to hopefully get the board to vote to post these for notice and comment in this upcoming board meeting, which would then allow it to be officially adopted in September, just prior to the law going into effect. It's not absolutely necessary that we have to have it done by then, but it's certainly going to be helpful if we have all these rules sort of ironed out before October 1st. Obviously, before we get to that, happy to take any questions that the committee may have.
All right, any questions for Michael on this?
I have a question. Or maybe this is a statement. So the proposed changes are really to align similarly situated employees so that employees that have made decisions with regards to pay are essentially moot when it comes to the calculation of their benefit under the authority. I just kind of want to say that out loud. Okay.
Mm.
And so it's logical to me that while there is a swing in the estimated claims payment for these individuals, it's likely not to have a material effect on like the fund and stuff like that. It'll all just kind of balance out as actuarial projections go on, because we're not talking about changing anything for the entire cohort of individuals that are eligible for benefits under the program. That's a fair statement.
It is a fair statement. The only
Okay.
caveat I'd add is if we don't make this change and we allow that sort of artificial bump in scenarios 2 and 3 that Michael referenced, that actually could hurt the fund because the contributions that all 3 people are making are the same. If you earn $30,000, you're paying 0.5% off of that $30,000. So making sure that the benefit isn't artificially inflated compared to the actual annual salary is protective of the fund.
Okay, that's helpful. So, and then I just have one final question. I just want to confirm. So this change will be if it is adopted by the board, it's effective prospectively. So for people who file claims as of today, and then those are processed, or is there some sort of reconciliation for those individuals that are currently receiving benefits?
There's nobody who's currently receiving benefits who, to our knowledge, has a situation where you get to be paid, you get to select for yourself amongst different payment options that impacts your quarters the same way that it does with school employees.
Okay.
You know, this would really only apply to those people who are newly covered as of October 1st, who work for public school operators or non-public elementary and secondary schools who up to now have not been in the program at all.
Okay, that's helpful. I'm not sure I forget how it posts for public comment, if there's any associated commentary. I'll have to go look at the website, but if there is, I think that's something that would just be helpful to know, for people to know that it's, because that's always the concern, right? Like, is anybody who's currently getting something going to change? And then that causes, consternation. So, yeah. All right. That's it. That's all. Those are my only questions.
Thank you, Holly. And so when we post the notice of the changes in the Connecticut Law Journal, I can include a specific statement about this calculation, in that posting. So they're more aware that the purpose behind that, the policy changes. But then also on our website, we will include the red line version of those changes. So anyone want to actually review the actual language.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? So I have a couple questions. So now, putting aside schools, for example, some manufacturers shut down in July, right, for a month-long period. If an employee who's covered employee who's not working during July and has a need for paid leave during the time they're not working, they still be paid?
No. So in order to qualify for benefits, you need to have been expected to have worked on that day. So that week. One of the questions we ask all employers is, when do you have company holidays, company shutdowns, things of that nature? Because if it's just for a day,
okay,
whatever days left, if they're still out the rest of the week, they'll get the full benefit. But if it's for a week or more, then we wouldn't pay benefits for that week because they're not expected to show up at work at that time.
Okay, so if we don't make this change that you've proposed, if one of these covered public school employees has a need for leave during the summer, they will not be paid by us.
Not exactly. They'll never get paid by us based on our current rules, which relate to you can only get leave if you're scheduled to work. You only get benefits if you were scheduled to work
Right.
and can't work because of the qualifying reason. Unless you're recently unemployed, which is a separate category. This really goes to the question of how to make sure that 2 or 3 people in the same exact job who have the same exact annual earnings, but can choose a payment schedule,
Right.
don't have their eligibility and benefit calculation either artificially deflated or inflated. So in your scenario, Mike, a person who works for an organization that shuts down every July
Mhm.
Is going to have a dip in their earnings in that quarter,
Mhm.
but so will everybody else who works for that employer in that job. So
Mhm.
you don't run this risk of this anomalous sort of outcome. And I mean, we have that right now with seasonal workers. You know, if you are
Mhm.
a landscaper, you're going to earn a whole lot more from April to October than you're earning in the
Mhm.
winter. That's just part of the nature of seasonal work. We're really just trying to address that situation where the industry has
Mhm.
normalized this concept that individuals can choose their pay schedule in this sort of wildly varying way.
I guess my questions lead up to when this change was made to the statute, there was no consideration of this issue in the legislation, right?
That's why we asked for the authority. We knew that
Okay.
there was going to be this problem. So that's why we asked them to make sure we had the authority to address it. But
Okay,
we,
maybe you've
we
answered my question. So do we have the authority to do this?
yes, the language specifically gives the paid leave the authority the ability to adjust the base earnings or these calculations for this population.
Gotcha. Okay. Then I don't have any further questions. Anyone
Yeah,
else?
and Mike, just to add clarity, like we do have other employers who don't fit into this category who work in a very similar schedule. So colleges and universities,
Mhm.
maybe very similar. You may have some like before and after school programs that maybe
Mhm.
they don't work during the summer. We don't have the authority to do this for those. We only have the authority to do it for the public school operators and non-public elementary and secondary schools at this time because it
Mhm.
was sort of incorporated as they changed the law to include them. They also gave us the ability to create a new calculation, but just for this population.
Well, but I will also add, we have no knowledge that colleges have this weird, sorry,
Mhm.
that's my personal normative judgment, this ability to offer different pay
Right.
structures. We know that if there is a public school that negotiates in,
Mhm.
the language that gives us the authority to do this is sort of specific to
Mhm.
is specific to employees of public school operators and non-public elementary and secondary schools who do not require certification. So if
Mhm.
you work for a public school or non-public elementary and secondary school and you do require certification and you bargain in, we've got a gap.
Mhm.
We have in all the years we've operated, because colleges and daycares have been in the program the whole time, none of them have come to us and said this is a problem. But
Mhm.
when this language was being negotiated at the legislature and they were getting testimony about it, this issue did come up, which is why they
Mhm.
put the authority into this
Mhm.
bill.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments about this policy, proposed policy? So where do we go from here with this? To the board?
Yes, absolutely. So I'll give a very similar presentation next week at the board meeting, and hopefully the board will vote to post them for public comment.
And if any of you have friends or family who are in these populations and want to share with them, please encourage them to check this out. We are also, once we get approval from the board, we can share this with the different academic institutions and associations so that we can make sure that we're not missing something.
Mhm. Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's move on to the next item, old business. Is there any old business anyone would like to discuss? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to new business. Is there any new business anyone would like to discuss? Seeing none, we will move to adjournment. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The meeting is adjourned. It is 9:37. Thank you very much for your time and attention this morning.
Thanks.
The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.